thanks for the opportunity. A couple of years ago, while I was still working in Kruger, I received an email from a journalist asking me whether I think Kruger and sandparks struggle with parachute science. Fortunately, it was an email, so I could check up on Google what is parachute science. I had something like this in my mind. And when I looked at what parachute science was, it's about, the classic sense is when scientists from rich, developed or global north countries come and they work in the global south countries without any real engagement. They sometimes also call it helicopter science. So they come in, they do research and they leave without really building and co-creating and without learning together in the process. So I had opinions on it and I responded something, but I think that was a bit of a bro science probably. Because it was just based on my own experience, and I thought, it would be really interesting and useful to explore this in a little bit more depth. And we chose an approach that's got lots of caveats and limitations, but it's a way to start the conversation and start looking into it. And then invited colleagues from South Africa, Zimbabwe, Argentina, and Australia together on this journey, just to get all the time spans where South Africa is right in the middle, which is really convenient for scheduling Zoom meetings. When I then started reading up about it, it was clear that it's quite topical in conservation, especially in the past couple of years. There's been a whole range of papers published on this topic about the concerns about it, the problems about it, and also some of the ways that one can possibly address it. I mean, you can say, but why is it a problem if people come and work in national parks that's not from the country? And the obvious ones is that the research is not aligned to the question, and the funding comes from abroad. It's not what's locally relevant and of local concern or interest. If it's not co-created, like Dirk was saying, it's just translated. There's no policy and management relevance and uptake because people don't feel part of the process. It's not contextualized and sensitive to the local situation. South Africa's got so many levels and layers and subtext, as an example. And it's about, we do research and we pass it on. It's not about learning together because there's lots of lessons to be learned from the global south with the global north. And then just the general lack of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. So when you look at the literature, what's interesting is a lot of this research is based on what can a journal do or what can a country do or whatever, but we work at the scale of individual parks. So we wanted to understand that a little bit better. And we decided to go look at 3 different contexts, parks that get a lot of research attention. In the global south, so Kruger in South Africa, Nualuapi in Argentina, and then a little bit of a contrast with developed economy, Kakadu in Australia. And we selected at random 100 papers from the last 10 years for each park, and then explored, and we used affiliation as a proxy for collaboration. We know there's very different ways in which one can and should be looking at collaboration, but this is just to start getting a feel of how much engagement there are in terms of the formal process of writing papers. And we looked at 2 things: the classic parachuting, like where it's whether there's a combination of international and national scientists on the papers, but also what we coined as park parachuting, where people from outside of the parks come and work there without engagement with the park. So that's not to do with any nationality. We also looked a little bit at funding sources and academic impact, which I won't go into too much detail today, and then the strategies that these case study parks use to actually try and encourage collaboration. I've got no slides with methods. If I had 15 minutes, I would have. So we're going right into the results. And what's highlighted there is, in red, is what can possibly be indicative of parachute science. That's the percentage of papers in the different parks that only included authors from international affiliations. So you can see a certain picture emerge there. I don't know if 18% is high or low, but it's definitely very different to, for example, Kakadu and even Nualuhapi. And this is quite often the type of statistics and data that's presented when people talk about parachute science. But we decided to dig a little bit deeper because we feel that there's actually more to it than to just look at how many papers didn't include national authors. If you look at the green part, quite a different picture emerge, and that's the international and national collaboration. And suddenly you can see the two parks from the global south are actually these hubs of national and international collaboration, whereas in the developed economy, there's not a lot of research interest. And if we really feel it's important to learn across cultures and contexts and that we can learn together, then the green parts also need to be high. So there's already a bit of a different nuance or perspective coming from that. If one then look at the park, what we call park parachuting, so external researchers coming into a park without engaging the managing authority, if you look at the green bits there, this is showing how much collaboration there were, or authorship there were shared between external and local, external scientists and the local authorities. And suddenly quite a different picture emerged from the global south, where there's actually more inclusivity in terms of people coming into the parks and co-creating the knowledge with the managers than what one would have expected, possibly, I don't know. And if you look at the red bits highlighted in red there, that is when we looked at the authorship or the acknowledgement sections to look at whether in the paper there's some acknowledgement of the contributions of the park or the park staff, etc. If you look at the right bottom line, those are basically the percentage of papers that didn't include authorship or an acknowledgement. So the park is never mentioned, or the park authority is never mentioned, except in the methods section or the study site section. And we feel that this is possibly indicative of poor engagement. If you, and we're not asking for guest authorship where you just put on park staff as an author to the paper, but if there's no mention of anyone in the park, one wonders how much engagement there were with the managing authority. This is just to show the funding sources. I'm not going to go into this into too much detail, but essentially research in Kruger and Nualuhapi had much more access to international funding. So that can be a potential benefit. If it becomes a dependence on international funding, well, then that's a disbenefit. So there's two ways possibly to interpret that. And this is not showing the impact of the research for the parks or the usefulness for the parks. This is just, and I know it's a bit of a swear word in this community looking at the citation rates, but I think it's interesting to look at the reach of the papers as well. And what this graph basically shows is that bringing in international or having combinations of national and international authors also get the science to be more broadly cited. So the academic reach of the papers seem to be increasing. And then I just want to end off with park-based initiatives that can be catalyzing collaboration, possibly. Dirk has mentioned it, Joop has mentioned it, and hopefully the third time you hear it is that in-house science capacity can really be useful to increase the absorptive capacity as well, to act as conduits with external scientists, and then bringing in the local managers into the process as well. An engaging project registration process. We feel that it's important that when you apply, you don't just fill in a form, you submit a form, and then you get a permit. You know, I think we want to move it beyond a bureaucratic process. So the model we use in sandparks, which we feel works pretty well, is that you get assigned a researcher. So then suddenly it changes into intellectual engagement rather than a monetary. So it's not a monetary exchange, but it's rather an intellectual exchange that's starting to happen. In some parks, people are required to pay a registration fee to do research there. And I think then it sets a different tone. It's not then about learning together or having intellectual engagements. You kind of feel like you're buying rights to do research in that context. Facilities to host external scientists. Noalu Hapi, for example, has got offices that they build and make available for university staff. We've got research camps and facilities in national parks in South Africa, which is a great way for people to actually locally meet. Conferences hosted by park agencies, GRIN being an example. Sandparks also host the International Savannah Science Network meeting. And it's amazing over time to see how much research gets generated and collaboration gets started up at these meetings, where the managers and the scientists meet and where international and local researchers meet, etc. And then funding of and collaboration or supervision of students, where you can build in collaboration and get the students to focus on projects that's really important in terms of what the park want to achieve and some of the management gaps. Thank you very much.